Okay, so we just finished looking at this problem, and I mentioned that it came from the law school admissions test. What I want to do is make this brief distinction, and the distinction is between deductive and inductive reasoning. Now, if I said that what we just went through is a piece of deductive reasoning, what I mean by that, and what I think that you've gathered, it seems like it's a very mathematical kind of reasoning. It seems extremely logical in a sense. But more to the point, when somebody's reasoning or thinking deductively, what that means is that whatever conclusion, or in our case with the problem that we just looked at, whatever answer we come up with, that's necessary. In deductive reasoning or deductive argumentation, the idea is that given that the premises or your starting points are true, the conclusion necessarily or must, absolutely has to follow from that. And so given all those problems that we just worked through, all of those particular answers, each of those particular answers was necessary based on the conditions for each problem and based on those global rules that we started with. And so that's one kind of reasoning. It's very, it is popular in, for example, mathematics. And in a moment, I'm going to suggest this is the kind of reasoning that Descartes is interested in. He's interested in asking, well, what can one know in a necessary way? But for Descartes, it's actually going to be a bit more difficult, it's extremely more difficult, than the LSAT problem that we just went through. Because with the LSAT problem, we had these starting points. We had a little setup and a little story about 6 runners, nameless runners, and a couple of heats. But Descartes is starting from almost nothing at all. And what he wants to know is what he can know for certain, or what is necessarily true or necessarily the case without a starting point. And so that's the kind of reasoning he's after. Here's another kind of typical example of a deductive piece of reasoning. This is your classic philosophy example. So soon enough, we will talk about the ancient Greek philosopher Socrates. The example that I have in mind for a deductive kind of argument, somebody says, well, all men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. And when I say therefore, I mean I'm about to give you a conclusion to that kind of argument. It's a very simple argument. There's just 3 statements overall. And those first 2, those premises, all men are mortal, Socrates is a man. Well, given that those are true, and they are true, it's necessarily the case that Socrates has to be mortal. There's no other way around it. Now, that's opposed to a different kind of reasoning, which is inductive reasoning. And with inductive arguments or inductive thought processes, nobody's suggesting that anything necessarily follows. But what people are tending to purport is that something probably follows from a set of facts or a set of assumptions. And so the kind of conclusion that's drawn is a little bit different in this case. Here's a quick kind of example. And it's more of an everyday example. Suppose I say, well, I've gone to, say, 10 concerts at Union Transfer at 10th and Spring Garden in the past couple of years since it's opened. This is a music venue. So I've gone to 10 concerts there in the past couple of years. I'm going to go see another show there next week. But here's the thing: every time that I've seen a show there, it always starts at least 25 minutes late. Therefore, nobody puts it this way, but we could say, therefore, I bet that the show at Union Transfer is going to start at least 25 minutes late next week. So that's an everyday kind of piece of reasoning. Maybe people don't even say it out loud, they just think it to themselves. It's not true, by the way. They're not always 25 minutes late, but the point is, what if they were true? What if those ideas were true? That I had been to 10 concerts there, they were always 25 minutes or more late. I'm going to a show next week, I bet, therefore, it's going to be at least 25 minutes or more late for the starting. Well, we know that there's nothing necessary about that. There's nothing guaranteeing that it wouldn't start on time or only 10 or 15 minutes late, 5 minutes late. And so when we reason in that fashion, and in particular that's a prediction. We predict things all the time. When we reason in that way, what we're giving is a kind of probable conclusion based on the evidence that we have. And based on the evidence, it could be a better or worse conclusion. If I had seen 10 there and there were always 25 or more late, that's pretty decent evidence overall. And so the point here is that there's just a difference between these modes of reasoning. And it's a basic distinction to keep in mind. Now, not all reasoning, not all arguments fall into these two easy categories. But it'll help us just to get started along the way. Okay, so that was part of the purpose of this short exercise. But also I want to drag this idea of deductive reasoning into Descartes' meditations. So let's start there. I want to give, with the meditations, again, we're just looking at 1 through 3. I want to give a sense of the structure of these, because it might be kind of difficult to read if you don't have a sense of where he's going with his thoughts. So let me give some basic ideas. And after that, at least with this first half of the week, I'm going to focus on meditation 1 and about half of meditation 2. In the latter half of the week, we'll finish with 2 and then move on to 3. All right? So what are the key ideas of each of these? Well, here's the idea of the first meditation. Descartes is concerned about previous knowledge that he's gained in his life and previous beliefs that he has become accustomed to. And he begins to wonder what it is that he really knows. What he really knows for certain. And so we have to talk a bit about certainty and what that means. He then employs what's known as a skeptical method of doubting. And so, again, I'll have to say something about this skeptical method. Make a note here for yourself. You shouldn't call Descartes a skeptic. He's just using a skeptical method. Now, the reason I say that is because there are philosophers and others who consider themselves to be skeptics. In the ancient tradition, they're known as Pyrrhonian skeptics often. There are different people in the modern tradition. And what skeptics end up saying is that, well, we can't really know anything at all, ever, for one reason or another. But Descartes doesn't actually end up being a skeptic, because in this search for certainty, by using this skeptical method, by the end of the first meditation, and I'm going to parse it out in a few minutes, he doesn't come up with anything which seems to be certain knowledge, but he does in meditation 2. And insofar as he thinks he's actually gained some kind of knowledge, and in fact, the kind of knowledge he thinks he's gained is a kind of foundation. A foundation in certain knowledge. That's going to serve as a foundation for the rest of his beliefs about the world. And so if in meditation 1, he employs the skeptical method of asking himself, what can I really know for certain? And he comes up with nothing by the end of meditation 1. It's in meditation 2 that he finds that bit of certainty. And that's where we're going to end, more or less, with the first half of the week. But in the second half, let me give some more of the structure. After he finds that foundation, he's going to characterize what that foundation means, and in a very peculiar and specific way that's very important. And he's also going to reestablish this foundation in a couple of ways, so we'll go over that. And then in meditation 3, he does something different, which doesn't obviously fit in with the structure so far. And so because it's not intuitive with how it fits in, we need to talk about why he bothers to do this. In meditation 3, he tries to do something. He tries to prove that God exists. And so how that relates to the first two will become clearer when we get there. But overall, this is the kind of structure, and it begins in an epistemological question. We went over epistemology in a previous video, Again, it's a question that begins with a concern over the nature of knowledge and what can be known. And so that is the kind of overall structure of the first three meditations. So in order to start looking at this, I want to look at meditation 1. And so when I said, well, Descartes is looking for something which is certain. Certainty takes on a certain kind of character for him. It is some kind of statement or some kind of nugget or idea which is indubitable. It is something which cannot be doubted in any way whatsoever. If he comes across a belief or an idea or an opinion which can be doubted in any way whatsoever, it cannot serve as a piece of 100% absolutely certain knowledge in the way that he's looking for it. In other words, it can't serve as a foundation. And why is he looking for a foundation? Well, that's a larger question. And so let me say something about Descartes and why some kind of foundation is important to him. So first of all, these meditations are published in 1641. Descartes was living from 1596 to 1650. And if you start to think back to what you've learned previously about this historical period, what Descartes is going to end up being known as is a father of modern philosophy. Well, why is he the father of modern philosophy? Because in essence, what he's doing in engaging these meditations and the discourse on method and other writings throughout his life is he's challenging a certain kind of authority. And he's challenging long-standing traditions and ways of thinking, which are tied up with one of the most powerful institutions in Western Europe at this time. Throughout the entirety of the Middle Ages, heading into the Renaissance and then the modern period, it's the Catholic Church. Which is the governing authorial body during this period. And so, as a Catholic himself, taught by Jesuits in different schools and universities, Descartes says to himself, well, it seems as though some of the things that I learned from these Jesuits and other teachers, well, I haven't really believed all of them, or I've come to find out that not all of them are true. And so on the one hand, he's looking back at his own beliefs, he's performing a kind of reflection and saying, well, if not all of my beliefs in the past have been true, and I know that that's the case, I might start to ask, well, what do I know now? Do I have any beliefs now which might be false? And how can I tell the difference? This is what's key. How can I tell the difference between knowing what is true and knowing what is false? How can I tell the difference between the beliefs that I have, which are true and which are false, if any at all? And so in asking, how can he distinguish between the true and the false, this is what it means to look after, to try to find something which could be certain, and which could then serve as a foundation for helping him achieve, or at least discern, what is actually true and what is actually false. So there's a very personal element, there's a kind of religious or theological element to his taking out these meditations. There's actually another element which has to do with the scientific revolution. And I'll say just one or two things about that, and then we'll move right into other parts of Meditation 1 in just a moment.